slayed that great beast which was Satan. That's really the ending. But you have to go all the way to Revelation. And while it has happened out of our sight physically, it has happened spiritually among the heavens. And we know that from Revelation chapter 12. And so we're just through these end days with the assurance that all will be good. But while we're in this world, there will be all manner of evil and wickedness, atrocities, etc. And I don't know any section of the Bible that would be more atrocious, more horrifying, unconscionable than what was going on right here. But the purpose is that God is going to show this is the spiritual depravity of his people. And that's what's going to happen. Now, we give you one more pre-qualifier here before we start reading this. In chapters 17 and 18, the first two chapters of the epilogue, we have a lot of personal, we have Micah, the story of Micah. It begins with a family, and then it extends to a tribe. Now, what is going to happen beginning in chapter 19 is that no one is identified, with the exception of one person. In chapter 20, Phineas is going to be identified. Now, let me show you a little something that'll give us kind of a location as far as time is concerned. In verse 1 of chapter 19, it came to pass in those days. What were those days? Well, when you turn over to chapter 20, and as the story goes on, the one and only person who's actually named is Phineas. Verse 28, and Phineas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days. This is going to be centering around the city of Bethel. And this is the grandson of Aaron, the leader or the origin of the high priest. As we had mentioned Wednesday night, that the priest that they had in chapter 18 and verse 30. We were just running out of time. I'm glad Jolene had pointed this out because we were dealing other things. But notice verse 30 of chapter 18. Then the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. Some footnotes in Bibles will say Moses. This is the same generation. And his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity. That would be until 722, when Assyria captured it. So what we have here is like the third generation from Moses and Aaron. Their grandsons now are going to come into play. And in chapters 17 and 18, it is dealing with all of the idolatry that was up north. You remember we had shown this, for those who weren't here Wednesday night, Dan, up here at the north part of the Promised Land. We're going to go all the way down here to Bethel, which is off this map. You remember Jeroboam had set up two places to worship. When we had noted Wednesday night that this story of Micah and the aftermath of that was setting up the idolatry that would be set up in the city of Dan. And this is the actual altar at the city of Dan where the people began to worship God. But they didn't begin to worship there in the days of Jeroboam. They started all the way back here in Judges 18. This is where they were worshiping. And this started from that third generation from Moses and Aaron. So one thing that we can find on this is that the cycles in the middle of it, we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that Judges is chronologically arranged, one thing after another, after another, after another. That's not the case. The prologue and the epilogue are really sandwiched together. And in the middle of that is the history of these cycles. But as we come to the end of this book, we're going all the way back to the beginning of Judges and seeing this was the state of mind of these people, and they would be in Bethel. And this is where this terrible story is going to begin. Now, any question or comment or thought about that before we actually get into the 19th chapter? All right. Chapter 19, verse 1. came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. I don't know how he did that, short of just buying her. Concubines would be considered somewhat of basically a female slave that would be used for the profit of the master. And I think, now I don't know, but I believe that this is probably how he acquired her. He got her. He and took for himself this concubine. Wasn't his wife, it's just a concubine. Verse 2, but his concubine played the harlot against him. Now that tells us that this concubine was in some sort of conjugal relationship, is that they would come together and he would have children by them. That's one of the benefits, and I use that word loosely. People would, that sounds horrible today, but one of the advantages of having a concubine is that this is another woman in your house to do the work and to have children who themselves can do the work. The more slaves you have, the more you can do. The greater your crop, the larger your herd. And so this was likely the bottom line purpose why they had these concubines. And she played the harlot. That means she was owned by him, but she went with another man. So this would, by their own law, would be illegal. So she has now broken this law, whatever we may think about that arrangement. We'll talk a little bit more about that in this morning's lesson. But she played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there 4 whole months. Then her husband arose and went after her. Notice what he is called. Not the master, but the husband. So there clearly is that recognition of some sort of marital relationship, that they are obligated to each other. Now, if you think about that for a moment, if you're the woman, how would you feel about that relationship? She's not, well, let's just think about Sarah and Hagar. Sarah was the wife. And among the women, the wife ruled the roost. Hagar was subject to Sarah. And in that story, we find Hagar so distressed over what is happening because she had the male child first. Remember, it was Ishmael. And she was so distressed at how she and her son were being treated, she went out to hide in the desert. And she's thinking that, well, it's better for me never to have been born. God's going to come to her and say, you're going to be blessed. But she was not a full wife. And that's what we have right here, is this woman, this concubine, is not a full wife, but he is called the husband. So it is almost like a common law marriage, as some places would describe it, possibly. And she's locked into that. And she says, I'm out of here. I think not unlike Hagar. I'm out of here. I just can't take this anymore. And so, verse 3, her husband arose, went after her to speak kindly to her. We're going to give him some credit here. Rather than reprimand her and scold her for running away, he speaks kindly with her. Now, whatever we may think about that arrangement socially in that day and time, he had enough sense to speak kindly with her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now, your daughter has just been taken by this stranger as a concubine. She's run away to come home. What do you think she's saying to her father when she ran away? What do you suppose? Dad, I'm just here for the weekend because it's so great back where I came from.
He's really mean.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That is terrible. It's just terrible back where I'm at. Horrible. I'm coming back here. Great. Hi, Luke, Leo. Good to see you here. Yeah, it's just terrible. We're in Judges chapter 19. So he looked at this and said, well, he's glad to see him. So that tells us that whatever was going on with the concubine daughter and her father, it's not as severe as we might think it to be, because now the father-in-law, and he's called father-in-law, so there is a legal connection. It's not just the father of this concubine. It's like every other person is male, the husband and the father-in-law. They all have normal titles, normal relationships, normal places in society. She is the one who is made the lesser. She's a concubine. I mean, that's not fair to her. And so she is this poor woman put into a man's world, and both her husband or / master and her father, they're getting along. They kind of agree with one another, which would suggest, I'm not saying this is the case, but that might strongly suggest that it was such a male-dominated world that even when it was your own daughter, that you understood, yeah, you've got to go with him. Yeah, I'm sorry you're upset about it, but this is the way things are. And so she is there, and he says, come on, stay with us. But this is where the story starts. It twists, and it goes in a really weird direction. John?
Is it possible that the husband bought the concubine from the father?
That's what I'm thinking.
That's what I'm thinking too, and that's, son, of course, come in.
Yeah, right.
I'm not going to reimburse you, but you can have her back.
Yeah, for so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that likely, that's what I said at the beginning, likely he bought her. Now if that is the case, though we don't know for sure, but if that is, and it may be likely, what kind of father would do that? A father who is raised in a chauvinistic world where women, as has already been noted by several, are considered property and they are to be used for their advantage. And so if I can make some money off of her, fine. And if she runs away, comes back home, he might be thinking, this guy's going to be really angry. You know, you reneged on our deal, and now he's glad to see him. We're going to work this out.
He could have been a slave too.
Well, that's interesting to think about that if he was, would he have the right to sell his daughter? I don't think so. Because when you own a slave, you own the slave's children and the descendants from that. So, however this works out, so the father-in-law is glad to see him. Verse 4, now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. Hey, let's just kick back. It's a long journey back from where you are from, up in the mountains there. Let's just take it easy for a few days. So it came to pass in verse 5, on the 4th day, that they arose early in the morning, and he stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. Well, have some breakfast at least before you leave. So they sat down, and the two of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. You know, this breakfast has gone longer than we thought, and we're having such a good visit here. I just don't want you to leave right away. Why don't you stay here again the night, and then let your heart be merry. We don't want anything to happen to you like that. Just relax. So he said, okay. There's 6. They sat down. The two ate and drank together. The young woman's father, please be content to stay all night. Let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he stayed there again. So this has happened twice. So he's been there at least 5 days. And it's like, now, how do you get out of this place? How do you get away from them? And we might think, is there something sinister that's going on here? Is this father-in-law, does he have a hidden agenda with his, would he call him son-in-law? Well, if he was a father-in-law, he would have to be his son-in-law, and more than just a business partner if he sold his daughter to him. He urged him to lodge there, so he lodged there again. Then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. But the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. And he said, oh, I've heard this before. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. They didn't eat until the afternoon. And when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here that your heart may be merry. It's the third time he said that. Tomorrow go your way early so that you may get home. But the man was not willing to spend that night. So he rose and departed and came to a place opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. Now, the distance roughly between Jerusalem and Bethlehem is just a few miles. You get up on a high spot, you can see Bethlehem from Jerusalem. It would be roughly about like from East El Cajon to La Mesa, something like that. It's not that far, but it's go through a hill and down the valley, and there you are at Jerusalem. So it's not that far of a journey, but get to the other side of Jerusalem, and see, I lost my place here. Yeah, and now they went toward those mountains, and well, I did lose my place. I'm on the wrong. Yeah, verse 11. They were near Jebus, and the day was far spent. The servant said to his master, come, please, let us turn aside into this city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. But his master said to him, we will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah. Now, a couple of things about that. Isn't this interesting that Jerusalem is a city of foreigners? The Jews have not inhabited this city yet. They would later, of course, but this servant says to this man, you know, we don't want to stay in a city of foreigners. Would that be for a social thing that they just didn't want to be around them? Were they discriminating against them? Could it be and or there was a matter of security there? I think the latter might be more in play with what is happening here. But we don't want to stay here with these foreigners. His master said in verse 12, we will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah. So he said to his servant, come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah. Now, those of you who, everyone knows, I think, that when you're traveling across the country, whether it be desert or mountains or wherever, that you don't wait until it's dark to start making camp. You do that before it gets dark because it becomes dangerous for a multitude of reasoning. Or you drive into a town at 10 o'clock at night, now you got to find a hotel. How much fun is that? Everyone's been there one time or another. And they, oh, why didn't you make reservations? Well, I thought I did. I did reservations, but they did have this and like that. You know, that's not a pleasant time. You know, at 10 o'clock at night, trying to figure out where are we going to sleep here. So here's something that I said, no, we're going to go on. So the situation itself already starts off wrong. They didn't leave early in the morning, which they should have. Now it removes a lot of their options, and now they're put into a situation where their choices are not good choices of what they're going to do. And so they say, all right, we'll move on there. So verse 14, they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. This is where the story comes in. The first two chapters of the epilogue, 17, 18, deal with the tribe of Dan. Now we said it'll move from a family, Micah, to a tribe, Dan. This section now is going to be dealing with the tribe of Benjamin. And this is going to be the center of the subject of this narrative. So they came here And they turned aside and went into lodge, verse 15, in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. Now that gives us another little bit of insight as to why they would not stay in Jerusalem or Jebus. It was a common practice that when a traveler, sojourner, would be traveling, he would go to a city of his people, of his tribe. Because by doing that, he would then come into the center of the city at the square with his entourage, with his family and his flocks and whatever he has, and stay in the square, which was a signal to the rest of the people, here is one of your brothers who has come in and needs shelter for the night. And so that was quite common. That's what they did. And so if they went into a city of strangers, they weren't going to be invited anywhere. They might even suffer a little problem. You get out of here. You don't belong here. Who are you? That kind of a deal, a situation. So they come into their city and they go into the square and sit down waiting for someone to ask them to come spend the night. But no one does that. No one would come and ask them. Verse 16, just then an old man came in from his work in the field at evening. I'm thinking this man's about 42, 43 years old. Old man. Because at 75, he's not in the field. I don't think so. If he is, power to him. I don't know how old is old and young is young and, you know, all those relative terms of youth and beauty. But this is signifying a man who doesn't have a lot to give and who himself, if an old man is working in the field, what does that say about his own personal financial situation? He can't retire. I don't think he has a 401k. He's just, he has to work to live. And so here's this old man who has been in the field all day, and he comes in and he sees them. He also was from the mountains of Ephraim. He was sojourning in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. So they're having some, there's some similarities here. They have something in common. They're both sojourners. Verse 17, and when he raised his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going? And where do you come from? He said to him, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah. Now I'm going to the house of the Lord. But there is no one who will take me into his house. Although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself, for your maidservant, and for the young man who is with your servant. There is no lack of anything. Now he says, we have food, we have feed, we have money, we have we just need a place to stay. We're not going to be a burden on anyone. But no one is inviting us to come spend the night with them. And spending the night in a sheltered place was an important thing. Because in some areas, there were obviously men of ill repute. There were robbers. In some places, there were wild animals that could take advantage of the flock. Short, quick story. It's not directly related, but in principle it is. One year when we were way down in South Ethiopia, we were just about to the Kenyan border. We were invited to go to this village, and it took 3 days to get there. We got there, spoke to the people, and then the preacher said, I want you to come stay with us. And his house was, I would say, roughly a third of the size of this building, but it was round. It was like adobe, mud with a grass top, and it had a giant pole in the center, like a telephone pole. And from that pole, he had all this little straw, the struts for the roof. And then inside, all along the wall, there were stalls. And stalls, like we'd walked into a barn. And he had some cows there. He had some sheep there. He had chickens everywhere, E-I-E-I-O. He had all kinds of animals right there. And they lived with them. And in the middle was their fireplace. And they were cooking lunch for us. And we were eating there were all the animals. And, you know, if you've ever had a barn, some of you still have barns, you know what the barn smells like, and looks like, sounds like. They lived in a barn, basically. And then they explained it to me. He said, we wouldn't dare leave our animals outside at night because we hear the lions walking around. They smell our animals and they're growling. When we were there, one preacher that we had known had been attacked by a lion and fell down the mountain, broke his back, and they had to carry him out to this remote village for a few weeks for his back to heal. While he was there, he taught the village. He preached the gospel to the village. So you think how providential that a lion would attack him. He would break his back while falling down this steep mountain. These strangers would find him, put him on some kind of leader, take him to their village, and while he's healing there, begin to preach the gospel to them, and they all learned the gospel. That's something you read right out of the Bible. Well, that happened just a few years ago in southern Ethiopia. It's just the way it works. That's life, because people are people are people, and the gospel doesn't change. So looking at how this works, it may be that their situation is that come into the city, we really need a place to protect ourselves from the element of robbers, bad people, wild animals that were certainly there roaming around that country at that time. So whatever it may be, in looking at that situation, they're sitting there thinking, you know, this is going to be a tough night if we can't find some shelter. And so, verse 19, although we have both straw and fodder, he said, we have all this, we don't lack anything. So verse 20, the old man said, peace be with you. However, let all your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square. So he brought them into his house, gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. End of chapter, end of book. Let's move on to 1 Samuel. Great story. That's not how that works. Wish it did, but we're gonna get some more here. So interestingly, this stranger says, "No, I don't want any of your money, your food, your feed. I'll take care of all your animals. I'll take care of you, and I'll protect you through the night." Well, that's great. They found a good friend. Verse 22. Now, as they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him carnally." This is a reflection of Sodom and Gomorrah when they were doing this to Lot in his house. They're not suggesting. They are so insidiously wicked to the core. They're going to break down the door to come after this man. And so this is what happens. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said, "No, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage." I think we're all familiar with the custom that is somewhat universal around the world and through time, that when you are the host of a stranger and they come into your house, you are responsible for their security and for their welfare. And if something comes against your guest, if a terrible thing happens, you are responsible and you have to take care of that. There's movies that have been made and stories that are written about this very principle. When a visitor comes and the Hatfields and McCoys kind of a deal, where the feud between families and one molests the guest. Well, they take that as a personal affront and they mount up and they go after him and the war starts. That's just has been, it's hard for us sometimes to understand that in the 21st century, but that was the way this was. You can think of some analogies today if you had a guest in your house and a stranger broke into your home and drug them outside, you wouldn't stand by just idly and just watch that and say, boy, that's too bad. Sorry, I thought I could have helped you. That wouldn't happen. So in that similar way, as this is continuing here, they want to know him carnally. They're going to take him out, and they're basically going to rape him. And this isn't going to be the end of it. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them. No, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage. He recognized that this was not normal, this was not right, that this was outrageous, this was unspeakable. Look, here is my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now. Now, you're thinking, if you're the concubine, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? What, now, you want what? And then people look at this and say, what kind of man would do this to his young daughter? I have no answer for that. I wish I did. But what I believe the purpose of that is that this is so unthinkable. But this is what Israel has done to God. God has raised his people up, and they have gone after the idols generation after generation after generation, and have taken their young, innocent children and put them to paganism, raised them into paganism, and have given them over to these horrible, atrocious things that are happening, of which one of them was child sacrifice. Going back to the story of Jephthah. How could that happen? Well, the reason is because it was happening all around them. And this tells us something about this man. We don't want to paint these people with a halo and that these are super righteous, almost semi-divine people in this story. They're not. They're Canaanites. They are people who have been so paganized by the gods of Canaan that even God's people now have become Canaanized. They have been paganized. They have bought into this idea of all of these idols and images against God. And God is showing them, we would think, oh, what man would do that? He said, you did that. This is what Israel has done against God. So when we think of it about as one person who would do this to his daughter, it just blows the gasket out of our thinking. This is unthinkable. That's right. God says, you got it. It is unthinkable. After I brought you out of Egypt and I gave you everything, and you did this. So that's why Judges is one of the most difficult books to read. It's so hard to absorb and digest because it's just wicked, and it will end in a wicked way. It sets the stage that this has gotten so bad. All right, any comment or thought or question about this so far? It's not a pleasant thing, I recognize, but it's the reality of what Israel has done when they went into Canaan. So, hate to keep reading this. Donna, would you like to read this for us? Donna said, can we just skip this part and go on? All right. Verse 25. But the men would not heed him. They wouldn't listen to him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. So they wouldn't listen, so he says, look, I'll give you my concubine. Now, one of the things that intrigues me about this story, there's nothing here to really ponder in any positive way, so I don't want to think the intriguing is, oh, isn't that pleasant? Nothing of the sort. But I'm wondering if in this story, she is referred to as a concubine, so he can buy and sell and trade and give away, rather than his wife. What man would do this with his wife? Now think about it. The father is offering his daughter, but we don't have a husband offering his wife. what we have is a man who is offering his property, the concubine, to these other men. And so, verse 25, the man would not heed. He took his concubine and brought her out to them, and they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when the day began to break, they let her go. That is just beyond the pale of any horrible act that we can think of. How many men were there? Who knows? It's just despicable is an understatement. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. She drug herself to the door. She couldn't go in. I guess it was locked. I don't know if she knocked on the door or not. The picture obviously is she is just barely alive. In verse 27, when her master arose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. What does that suggest? Her hands are on the threshold. What?
She called there. She was
And
trying to get in.
she's trying to get in. Her hands are on the threshold. She's trying to get in. What a pitiful, horrifying, devastating picture to see. And it just stuns how this would happen. Verse 28, and he said to her, get up and let's go. Oh, what a pal. Here's a man that, we'll just leave it at that. Here's a man. He doesn't understand what's going on here. Either that or he doesn't care. Is it indifference more than ignorance? Or a combination of both of them? Could be. Your guess as good as mine. But whatever it is, that's not the right move, obviously. John?
Well, he was willing to sacrifice her for himself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you're not taking me here. Have her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the original intent of the men? Did they want the woman?
No.
They wanted the man. Oh, you don't want me. Oh, I know. But here, I got something here for you. You'll like this a lot better. The depravity of the people on both sides is stunning. It's just stunning. And Julie?
I mean, we look at this and we think that is just the worst, because it is, but don't think this isn't happening now. Don't think that there aren't women being treated like property and thrown away when they're done with them.
Right.
And so this is what scares me when men start talking about what women should be doing in their
Right.
lives. Anytime somebody comes after a group and tells them what they should do with their lives, it is, the proverbial slippery slope. You dehumanize a person, eventually you can do anything to them.
Right.
And I've
And
heard
they
this, I haven't read this story very often. And when I have, I've just gone up. It's just another, it's a lot like Sodom and Gomorrah. I've just put it in a category that doesn't even apply, not anything I have to worry about. But I'm telling you right now, I worry about these things.
Sure.
Not for me, but for the women in this world. And I think women that are treated as property, this is what happens to them. They have no value. And when you devalue someone, whether it be a woman or a minority or whatever, you can eventually do anything to them.
Right. This is actually a sermon in itself today. That it is an illustration of a sin-cursed world. That's what we're reading. when sin has cursed this world, sin knows no limit. And the wickedness and evil of men has no end. And when they are in governments or series of governments that can be so ungodly, they become so brutal and so violent. And to say that they would be misogynist or chauvinist is an understatement of the year or age, is that these terrible things that are going on. And so what Julie says is right. That's going on today, just as it went on there. But what would they have in common? The one thing that both of these scenarios, either in this century or 24 centuries ago, is that it is because of the sin that has cursed their culture, their land, their people. I'm convinced, and I think most people understand the principle, but we do not understand the depth. What sin does to a land. Abel's blood cried out for justice. We had no idea that how sin had so polluted the land itself and was so wicked. And they walked into Canaan, the land that was supposed to flow with milk and honey. It was so polluted with sin, and they couldn't get it out. So now God is saying, this is what happens. Barry, Keith?
So we don't have to look very far at all. It's still happening today in Canaan. Last October 7th, the exact same thing happened.
Exactly.
They took those people, and how many pictures did we see of women raped and babies burned and whatever else it was that was just horrible in that same place? I mean, that's
right in that same spot.
That land is fairly cursed.
There's another understatement. Yeah, that'll be that way to the end of time. That's exactly right. Keith? No, okay. We said it already. Okay. Anyone else? Jolene?
Well, I think the master is showing why she left him in
Yeah,
He
that
was
could be.
able to go there and
Right.
we think of much.
Yeah.
He's left.
Yeah. Come on, girl. Get up. Come on. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why she would leave him in the first place. All right. Well, we're out of time. We'll pick up there Wednesday night and go from there.